Many people think the moon is an easy target for astrophotography. However, the more I photograph the moon, the more I realize how challenging it can be. Because capturing the moon as we see it with our eyes, especially when it is surrounded by glowing clouds, is very difficult. Hi, my name is Tim, and welcome to my channel Cosmic Captures. In this video, I will show you how to take a striking image of the moon in the clouds. And I will explain how to use basic photography gear and software you might already have to pull off a shot like this. So let's get started. The cool thing about this project is that you don't need any type of dedicated astrophotography gear. You can use a normal camera and a telephoto lens. I've been using a Sony Alpha 7R Mark IV and a Sony 200-600G lens. But it does not need to be anything as fancy as this. You can also use a super zoom camera if you have one of those. But one of the things that I recommend is using a remote shutter control, because this helps you to avoid any kind of camera shake. We want to get sharp moon images, and they're only possible if we don't shake the camera while we're taking the exposure. That also means that you put your system on a steady tripod. Use a ball head, use a video head, whatever you have at hand, that is the most stable combination. So I guess what I'm saying is use whatever you have, go out there, take pictures, experiment, and create something beautiful. Here are a few tips on how to actually use your camera gear to photograph the moon. The first and most obvious one, of course, is to point your camera at the moon. And if you are using a zoom lens, then it's smart to bring it down to its shortest focal length. This way you have less magnification and finding the moon will be much easier. Then taking exposures of the moon, I always start by picking an exposure setting or a shutter speed that clearly shows me surface features on the moon. So the moon shouldn't be overexposed, it shouldn't be underexposed either, and that is my base exposure setting. And then on my Sony camera, I can use a feature called bracketing shooting. And for this project, I chose the one-stop difference between the different exposures, and I want to take 5 different images. And this way I capture a much wider brightness information range than I could with a single exposure. Yeah, what else? Yeah, focusing is also perhaps something that is important. On my camera, it works flawlessly to use autofocus, but only if I expose the moon correctly, so I can see surface features. If the moon is overexposed, it's not going to work well. That's it. Once you're done, you can transfer your files to your computer and start editing them. To edit this picture, you need 2 pieces of software. You need Adobe Lightroom and you need Photoshop. But before I go into the details of how to edit it, I want to show you a picture. This is an image of the September full moon. And that night we had these beautiful wispy clouds around the moon, and the moon just looked magical. So I took my camera, went out into the backyard, took a number of exposures and loaded them into Photoshop, stacked them, aligned them, started working with brightness masks, curves, and lots of complicated stuff basically. It took me almost a full day to get to this result. Most likely because I didn't know how to do it. Anyways, I was thinking, isn't there a way to do this in a much faster and also easier way? So I experimented a little bit more, and this is what I came up with. Here I've already loaded 5 images into Lightroom. They all have different exposures. One of them has a standard exposure, and then we have 1 over, 2 over, 1 under and 2 under. So in total 5 exposures that spread over 5 stops. And within those images, there's a huge amount of brightness information. And what I want to do now is to combine all that information into one single image. And to do that, simply select all those images, right-click on them, and then there's a menu item called Photo Merge. And if I select HDR in that box that opens up and click on it, then Lightroom takes a couple of seconds to generate a preview. And once the preview is done, I can leave all the other settings here on the right-hand side as default. I simply click on Merge. Lightroom takes a couple of seconds to generate that final HDR image. Yeah, and here we have the image. And then I go to Develop. What you see in the screen recording is that the disk of the moon is completely white. But what I see on my display, because it's an HDR capable display, I see the darker areas of the moon, and the moon actually looks very bright. One interesting thing here, there's a new area on the right-hand side of the histogram called HDR, which gets added to the standard dynamic range part of the histogram. And I see a couple of bumps there, and all of that is overexposed if I only look at it with a standard dynamic range display. But there's a tool for that, to compress all those brightness levels down into an area that is displayable with a standard dynamic range display. So if I scroll down here a little bit, there's an area called SDR rendition settings. And if I click on that, you can also now in the screen recording see that the moon has structure, the moon has some surface features. And I can work with these sliders here. I can, for instance, say, okay, I want to have the moon less bright. I reduce the highlights a little bit. I reduce the whites a little bit. And what I also notice here, that my image is very, very warm. I can easily fix that because I shot everything in RAW format. I go up to temperature, bring the slider down just a bit until the moon has more of a neutral gray color. What I also can do is to work with masks. And if I click on masks and click on subject, Lightroom selects the only thing that stands out, which is the bright moon, and masks that. And here I can now say, okay, let's bring the exposure of the moon down just a little bit. Maybe I want to increase the saturation of the moon just a bit, and I can, let's see what else I can do. Yeah, down here there are the effects, and I can increase the texture, zoom in a little bit more so we can better see it, and I can increase the clarity. Yeah, that's it. So I'll go out of the masks area. This looks good already, I think. One thing that is quite interesting here is the dehaze slider. Normally you use it to get rid of haze, but in this case, I don't think it really helps us because it removes the bright halo around the moon. And actually, I want to keep that because that's how it looks when I look up and see the moon in clouds. There's a bright halo around the moon. So I can use the slider, but in the opposite direction. So if I reduce the dehaze value, then you can see that, oh, there's a bright halo around the moon. Of course, I need to be careful here to not make it look super unnatural. I think somewhere around here, -18 looks quite okay. What else can I do? Yeah, maybe I want to increase the shadows just a bit to bring out a little bit more structure in the clouds. And that looks good. Also, these sliders up here, they still work. And maybe I bring up the blacks here a little bit. Yeah, I think that is a good base, and I can simply save that or export that as a TIFF. Here I've already entered the name. If I go down to the file settings, I select TIFF, and then it's important that I select here this box, HDR output. then my bit depth is 32 bits. And that means that my exported image still contains all the brightness information that I had in those 5 files. So I simply export that, and the next step is to further refine the image in Photoshop. I prefer to finish my images in Photoshop because Photoshop gives me a much wider range of tools that can help me to improve my images and also fix issues. I want to show you something. Here I've already preloaded the file that we had created in Lightroom. If I zoom in on the moon, and here on the top edge of the moon I see this bluish edge, and the same here at the bottom of the moon, and I want to fix that. And the first way to fix that would be in the camera raw filter. But before I do that, I want to convert my file into a smart object, because the beauty with smart objects is that I can apply different filters with different settings, and I can always go back and change settings if I want to. Now I want to go into the camera raw filter and again zoom in on the top edge with that blue color. There's a module in the camera raw filter that can help me to fix that, and you'll find it under optics, and it's called defringe. And what you normally do is you select the color picker, and then you click on the color or on the edge where you see the miscoloration. And then Lightroom selects the color range that you picked. But I feel it's not doing what it can do with the automatic color picking. If I extend the range of the color a little bit to the left, you see what happens to the top edge. All the colors are gone. That's wonderful. Now I go down here and have a look at the edge. So where does that color range sit? I can try to let Lightroom pick the color by clicking on the edge, but then it is trying to pick that color range here on the bottom color range. But that's impossible, because the only thing it can pick here is like orange yellow. And all the other colors sit here on the top bar. So what we have to do now is to say, okay, we're happy with the blue edge. And then what we can do, we can apply another camera raw filter. And this time I select that color slider here and pick these colors. And then I increase the amount and see what happens to the edge. The colors are gone. That is fantastic. For now we are done here. I want to fix something else. And this is here the edge of the moon. And here, especially on the left hand side, I see some ugly, like almost like, I don't know, it's probably from the stacking, because the images that we took, in each image the moon had slightly moved because it was moving across the sky, and Lightroom did its best to align those images, but I don't think it's perfect, and I see this kind of double edge thing here. Yeah, how to fix that? I think I have an idea. Let me just do that, and then I'll come back to you and explain what I just did there. Yeah, I'm back. So what I just did is I created an edge mask, and that edge mask looks like this. My feeling is that here the edge of the moon is just very harsh in some areas, and perhaps by blurring just the edge I can soften that. If I now apply a Gaussian blur filter to my edge, and if I decrease the radius, those artifacts here on the edge don't look as harsh anymore. Yeah, it's not perfect, but I hope you see what I did there. Of course, I can't do it manually. I can use a brush and brush over those issues here, but it always depends where I want my image to end up. If I just want to upload it on Instagram, then everything that I'm doing right now is total overkill. You don't need to spend time on that. My image is very high resolution, so if I ever intend to use it in a large print, then I better fix those issues. And I can do that with the help of these tools. Once I'm happy with my file, I can export it. I'll do the following. I save a copy and I pick TIFF, but I don't want to export the layers. And then I click on save, and then Photoshop is asking me what is the bit depth. And I select 16-bit. And then I click OK. Of course, I can do lots of other refinements and improve the image. And all of this is a matter of personal preferences and your taste. An interesting thing would be to compare it to my manual attempt of creating an image like this. And I will do that now. I've already preloaded the old file and added the file that we've created together. And if I toggle between those two, yeah, well, they look very, very different. Perhaps what I can try is to blend both. Yeah, if I go to 50%, I actually quite like that. Anyways, you can see that there's so many different ways to do this, and all of this is just personal preference. But I would like to hear what you think about the image as well. And also, if you've ever tried to photograph the moon in the clouds and how that went for you. With that said, if you want to learn more about lunar photography and how to create an epic color image of the moon, watch this video, and I hope I'll see you there.